Imagine if someone were running for Congress with a platform for, quote, ending legalized bribery in Congress. Well, you don't have to imagine him because he's right here. Steven Olikara running for US Senate in Wisconsin on the Democratic side. Steven, welcome.
Great to see you, Cenk. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, no problem. So that Democratic primary race in Wisconsin is fascinating. That's a positive way of putting it. A mess is the other way of putting it. Okay, so I want to come back to that in a second in terms of the political dynamics. But I'm curious how your campaign has gone. That has been the central focus: ending legalized bribery, ending money in politics, etc. But there's a lot of big names, big money involved in the race. So what's been your experience running for Congress?
Well, as we've talked about in prior forums, the press, the corporate media, and the corporate Democrats are all colluding together to make this not a real race. And they see that our message of ending legalized bribery and getting big money out of politics as my first piece of legislation is resonating, it's connecting, and they're doing everything they can to silence our voices. And to me, this wouldn't pass the snuff test even of an Onion article headline. I mean, basically, we had a debate scheduled recently, and the three corporate establishment candidates all declined their invitations, even to debate. And you know as well as I do, Cenk, that the corporate press looks at money as their number one determinant in reporting on races. And so if the race is all about big money and ads, there's no visibility into who's actually getting people fired up at the grassroots level. And you wonder why so many corporate Democrats lose big elections. This is the election against Ron Johnson. It's extremely important that we win. And I think we need a true progressive who has a real populist agenda to clean up our government in order to win this race.
So I remember we had a debate when I ran for Congress, and the Democratic favored candidate, the establishment candidate, didn't show up. And the crowd was like booing her. It was amazing. All the other candidates spoke out against her. And the headline in the corporate media was, smaller candidates criticize Christy Smith, who's out doing the people's business. Okay, I mean, the fact she claimed that she was in the state legislature at the time, and that's why she couldn't be there, is a total lie, fabrication, easily disproved, right? If they just, but no, they're just going to frame everything in favor of the established candidates. So now, Steven, it's one thing when you hear it from the outside; it's another thing when you live it. So
yes.
Even having talked about it, were you still surprised at how significant the bias in the press was?
It's a good question. I was well aware of these forces before I jumped into the race, but stepping into the process myself, you just see how hilariously unequal this electoral system is. And you start to see things behind the scenes that if it just got out into public, people would be outraged. I mean, just the candidates themselves don't talk about experience, don't even talk about what they want to achieve. They're just trying to put up some generic ads on TV, and it's just a race to obtain name ID essentially. And seeing more behind the scenes, also how the corporate media is involved in all of this was shocking. For example, this is one of the most important Senate races in the country. In fact, the balance of the US Senate could hinge on this race. So I assumed that there would be many candidate forums, multi-candidate events, debates, that the media would be covering that. And frankly, they haven't. To date, this campaign's been going on for over a year now. And how many multi-candidate events, which happen almost every week now, how many candidate forums have the corporate media showed up to report on? Zero. And they admit that themselves. And then as we already talked about, there have been, not only in the first debate did they cancel it because not enough people showed up. Of course, we still showed up there. But still to date, there have been zero debates as well. So just seeing that was surprising to me because I think that the public deserves to know what their options are. And as a result of this negligence from all of these forces, the top front runner in this race right now by over a mile is I don't know. It's undecided. And so there's a huge problem in terms of just awareness in this race, and we got to close that gap in terms of our digital media and unconventional campaigning. As an example, we launched a bar band tour across the state where I'm playing with the local bands, everything from Nirvana covers to Black Sabbath, and it's been a lot of fun and a great way to reach people.
The website, by the way, is StevenOlikara.com, and we'll put the link down below too. So, Steven, one last thing about the media, and there it is. We're showing it to you so you know how to spell it too. There's a mythology in the media that elections are about a battle of ideas, and that you run and a corporate Democrat runs and another progressive runs, and then you guys all had a debate, and then the people of Wisconsin decided that they liked the other person's ideas rather than they like your ideas. Now, how ridiculous is that now that you've lived it?
You would hope that it's a battle of ideas. You'd hope that we have a real democracy, but we don't. We have a race to be a corporate telemarketer in Congress, and I'm serious about that. And to me, if I'm a voter, I'm thinking to myself, we go through this process every 2 years, and we get all riled up around different issues. There's a huge race to fundraise, and then nothing gets done on the other side of that. And at a certain point, you have to call on this process. And that's what we're doing in this campaign. And although the corporate media doesn't want to have a real debate of ideas, we are able to mobilize a lot of people at the grassroots level. And here's one thing they don't want to tell you, but we've found abundantly on the campaign trail. Getting big money out of politics is probably the most unifying issue in Wisconsin and probably in the country. The only people who are against this agenda are really the corporate elites in both parties. But I can tell you, whether I'm talking with progressives in Madison, Wisconsin, or one of my favorite events was up in Neillsville at a veterans memorial where no one there was a Democrat, but a lot of people who are disaffected Republicans. They were just as fired up about this agenda as Madison progressives were. So this is a movement whose time has come, and they just got to give us the mic. And I appreciate platforms like this to be able to get the message out there.
Yeah, there is this great dichotomy that it is the one issue that unites the whole country and the one they are most animated by, and the one covered the least by the press. That's just amazing. So that's when you know the game is actually rigged, right? Yeah. And so we can get into why and how on another day. But speaking of bringing people together, you tried something called the Reunited States, where you were trying to bridge political and racial divides before you ran for Senate. I'm curious, in this incredibly divided US, how did it go?
So I think, this is a documentary film that's out there which highlighted my work with the Millennial Action Project, working with millennial and some Gen Z elected officials across the country and having community level conversations about the real issues. And the main takeaway from that is people are so hungry for new politics, and yet the political elites don't represent the real agreement that there is at the grassroots level, that this corruption is rampant and it has to stop. And I think the real connection that was made at the grassroots level through a lot of the events covered in the Reunited States was the fact that money is at the root of why our politics is so polarized today. Because the number one way that you can raise a lot of money for your campaign and for a political party is just by dehumanizing a bunch of people and not really saying what you're for. And even people who are reasonable in person, I'm sure you've met elected leaders like this, Cenk. In private, they're so reasonable. And then in public, they go absolutely wild. And the reason why they do that is because of the money and the endless desire to fundraise. And so, to your point, is extremely challenging because of the systemic forces in our politics. But at the same time, I saw a very promising consensus at the grassroots level to create a more dignified and honest kind of politics.
Yeah, well, look, if the press would ever give the mic to anyone running on corruption as their top issue, they'd win in a landslide. But the press will not do it under penalty of law. The only time that anybody broke through a little bit was Elizabeth Warren when she was running on corruption and legalized bribery. She even used those words at the presidential level. And you know what happened? She instantly became #1 in the field. And then the Democrats yelled at her and she stopped talking about it and she slid into oblivion. Okay, so it's amazing. It's an amazing phenomenon. All right, one more thing. This is really important in Wisconsin because normally, Steven, there's one progressive in the race and then a total corporate Democrat bad guy in the race, et cetera. But not so in Wisconsin. There's a couple of very corporate candidates running for the same seat. They've got a ton of money. They have the most money. But there's a couple of good progressives as well in this race. So between basically the three of you, why should people vote for you instead of the other two progressives?
Well, the most important thing with our campaign is that this is not a message that I invented yesterday. You know how Bernie Sanders would say, I've been saying the same thing for 30 years. Well, I've been saying the same thing for the last 15 years, the entire time that I've been in politics. So I've been extremely consistent on this vision for a new politics. I have the actual experience to get it done. Through my organization, Millennial Action Project, we were directly involved in passing legislation on nearly every topic that we've talked about, whether it's campaign finance reform, ending partisan gerrymandering at the state level, as well as passing gun violence prevention bills as well. And so even we've passed 35 bills through Congress and had a direct role in those. Even if I passed one bill through Congress, that would give me more federal legislative experience than anyone else in this race. And then the final thing is the ability to expand the electorate. And you don't expand the electorate by being a political hack. And we've got plenty of those in this campaign. The way that you expand the electorate and give people real hope is being honest and being authentic and showing people that you have a real track record around your message. And so that, I think, is the biggest differentiators in this race.
All right, Steven Olikara, and of course the website, stevenolikara.com. Thank you so much for joining us and for having the courage to put yourself out there and run. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for giving us a platform because we know the corporate media is not going to do that.
We've been giving people a platform fighting against corporate media for a long time now, and happy to do it. Thank you, Steven.
Thank you.